going to use this wonderful function called a TSF double register write. It's luckily all there. And in the receiving path, when we're receiving a beacon, we are going to insert this little clause here, extracting the timestamp from the beacon received and writing it to the TSF timer register, so that our beacons, when they go out, will have stamp of the good known AP to which we're synchronizing. And again, it sounds great, but it doesn't work, because doing just that breaks beaconing. You start overwriting the TSF register, and something about how beacons are scheduled and pushed out on the by the beacon send queue is broken. And here is this fat smiling snake, right? But that's okay, because we can nudge it. Right after we've gotten our timestamp from the real AP, we're going to kick the card saying, it's time to send the beacon. And so that will force the beacon transmission. And the TSF timer actually stays overwritten. Okay. And the result is something like this. So one of those colors that I don't see is red. And this is the real AP. And the other color is green, which is what we push out in our faked beacons, right? Or maybe the other way. But anyhow, you can see that one of them kind of follows that line, except every now and then it dips. That's when our synchronization is not fast enough. But that's okay, because the real skew and the spoofed skew they're pretty close. And actually, considering that within a normal clock skew, you expect a 0.30, 0.70 variation. This is within the normal daily variation. So what you see is that, this is a hot day. The clock is behaving a little bit different. That's okay, because it's within the normal variation. And so
what you need to do instead is if you wanted to detect that kind of thing, you would have to detect something called jitter, for which there are different definitions, and that's some of deviations from what you would expect, basically, and not the actual skew.
And we'll show up you a picture of that later. But, let's see how far we can take this. What we want is for the client to be misled into mistaking us for that AP, even if it's watching for the clock skews. And it's really easy for the client to watch out for the clock skews, because if you recall, you need no more than a Wireshark and a very, very simple script that does the line fitting and figures out the clock skew. So, unfortunately, the AP, the real AP, may also be heard by the same client. And in that case, timestamps will collide, and the skew will be all screwed up. And we don't want that. But the tail of 8211 channels is that they overlap. And so you can be presenting a stronger signal to the client on a different channel. And clients and drivers actually tend to throw out stuff that you hear on a different channel after you've decided which channel you decide to be associated on. And so what we're going to do is we will choose a neighboring channel to broadcast our signal. And there is a place in the kernel, in the driver, that figures out the channel on which the access point with which you're going to associate is, and it fills it in from the scanning results when it's looking for the stronger signal. And what we are going to do in our driver, of course, is we're going to override it, because otherwise we won't be able to occupy these two adjacent channels. And it turns out that there is another place in the management frame receiving path which basically discards the beacons that come in on a channel other than what you are on. And so in order to receive those beacons from a real access point so that we could synchronize to it, we just need to disable the discarding part. And that we did. And so this is the result stretched to scale so that you could see the deal about this. Again, the real AP is the line that's straight. The spoofed AP is the line that's, well, not really a line, right? But imagine that this line is very, very thick. And so it's, again, pretty much the same slope. It's, again, pretty much coincides with the red line, which is what we're trying to spoof. But unfortunately, there is this extra variation. How much variation is there? Not that much, it turns out. So even though we're missing some beacons because of the silly switching between channels, the real skew of 17.25 gives us a spoofed skew of 16.49. This is the difference on the order of, what, 0.70, the top of the expected variation in one clock skew. And this is, you know, we can do better than that in some cases. This is a difference about 30. Well, that's okay, because again, this is the lower end on what you expect in variation. And we failed this test once by going by having a variation of about 1 ppm right here. Well, yeah, we're unlucky one time out of 4. And so we can still do that, I would say. So the deal with this is how you detect it. So no longer it is okay to just fit a line to the measurement curve. And of course, if I collapse the scale, you will actually see one of those green lines, if that is green. Anyhow, you have to look at the jitter. You have to look at this, whether there is a consistent variation component in there. And you can do that, but it gets kind of hairy because at microsecond intervals, you know, you never know what is your error and what is the behavior of the AP. But you've got to watch out for it, because if you're doing that sort of detection. Well then, this is the picture for the normal beacon interval, 10 beacons per second. And so we can spoof pretty well. at that beacon interval. What if we reduce the beacon interval and start sending more beacons? It becomes slightly harder to spoof. What if we start sending twice as many beacons per second, 4 times as many than normal? Then yeah, you can actually tell that something bad is going on because you actually see a lot of jitter. But then, of course, you can increase your beaconing, you can shrink your beaconing interval even further, but then, of course, your network will be all beacons. That's very useful. On the other hand, if you reduce your beacon rate, well, this is where spoofing becomes much, much simpler. Okay, then. So, for conclusions, timestamp measurements are really nice and exciting. It's just there are a number of really interesting papers out there, starting with the classic by Conor Broida-Claffey, and continuing to that paper that we slightly adjusted the claim of, that it's a great paper and it's a great piece of work. And you know, even if we were scooped, we were happy that the idea has been put out there. Except, of course, software scheduled injection is not the best that one can do. In fact, if you look into the card, and this is actually what I learned at ShmooCon and at TourCon, is that you really have to know your card. You really have to know your driver. You really have to, and it's great because you can meet all the people who are experts in this, which we're not, and you know, ask them nicely, and they might actually be able to tell you. But you've got to know your card, and if you know your card, you can spoof those things really, really well because the card itself does most of the work for you. It's already helping you a lot. So, nevertheless, if you're paranoid about who you connect to or about what sort of access points are on your network, and you can do a lot of sniffing, which we actually can on Dartmouth because we have about 200 wireless monitors spread out through the campus, then asking a device, what's the time? What's the time? What's the time? What's the time? Is a good prelude to a closer association. And a good way of, and listening is a good way of finding out what this device might be as opposed to what it's claiming it is. And finally, unfortunately, AP beacon timestamps appear to be spoofable. So if you're building a product based on that, you have to be very careful as to what you measure. A simple line fitting technique would not work. You'll have to watch out for jitter, and maybe, just maybe, you'll have to do something else. And we should all try harder. And of course, you know, we'll be happy to take a look at that once you're done putting in the hard work of developing it. And we're going to post the slides and the patch for what it is. And this is a picture that I was looking for to conclude with the title, "What's the time, please?" And this is what Flickr came back with. So apparently this emu wants to associate, but is careful who he deals with. And there is another one out there, I think, doing the same. So, you know, it's looking at the dashboard timer. And, is that really this car that I want to be dealing with? Okay. With that, I'll take your questions.
I don't have a question so much as a point. I think that you can get rid of the part of the jitter issues by adding a second register into the driver and having it increment the TSF timestamp by a certain number of milliseconds per.
I'd love to talk about this, right? Yeah, Okay, so